My wife and I are both 49 years old, and we reside in South America. Recently, I've been searching online for a platform to express my frustration, particularly among people who have gone through similar experiences to mine. The reason for this is that I've just discovered that my wife, whom I've been married to for 28 years, was having an affair with a 24-year-old. I can't help but wonder how common this situation is because, had it not been for my neighbor confiding in me, I might never have known, and her affair might have continued unnoticed. We have a 19-year-old son and a 21-year-old daughter, both of whom are in college and living away from home. Our residence is situated in an affluent area. While I wouldn't describe myself as wealthy, I do come from a background of financial comfort. I hold down a modest job, and the same goes for my wife. She works as a manager at a textile company, overseeing a team, most of whom are in their 20s. Everything changed dramatically for me 2 weeks ago. It was a Friday, and I had just pulled into my driveway after work when my next-door neighbor approached me. He invited me to his house to watch a soccer game the following day, explaining that he had something important to discuss with me. I found this quite unusual since we weren't particularly close friends. We had hung out a couple of times during neighborhood events, exchanged greetings, and engaged in small talk when our paths crossed. He's around my age, but his kids are much younger than mine. He's one of those peculiar guys who jog around every morning as if they're training for a marathon. My wife and I used to tease him because he seemed to have an outfit for every occasion. One day he'd be running in matching attire, and the next day he'd be all decked out in his cyclist gear, pedaling away as if he were preparing for the Tour de France. I was a bit apprehensive because I wasn't sure what he had in mind. I assumed he might be trying to sell me something since I knew he worked in sales, or perhaps he had some investment he wanted to discuss with me. So the following day, a Saturday when I usually had little to do in the evenings except exercise when I felt motivated, I decided to take him up on his offer. He welcomed me into his home, and we settled down to watch a European Premier League game, which wasn't something I typically followed. I took a seat on his couch, and he had a beer ready for me. It was just the two of us since his wife and kids were not at home. After a few minutes into the game, he shifted the conversation and mentioned that he wanted to share something with me that might upset me, but he believed, as a man, he had a responsibility to inform me. I was thinking, here comes the sales pitch. But then he showed me a series of startling photos on his phone. These pictures featured my wife and a young man walking hand in hand at a shopping mall. He displayed 5 pictures from various angles, explaining that he had taken them 3 weeks ago while he was shopping with his own kids. Initially, he hesitated to share them with me for 3 reasons. 1, we weren't close. 2, he thought it wasn't his business. And 3, he wasn't aware of the nature of my relationship with my wife. However, as time passed, he felt compelled to share this unsettling information with me. It became increasingly difficult for him to greet me, knowing that my wife might be having an affair with another man. Initially, I experienced a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, embarrassment, and then anger towards my neighbor. I thought he might be playing a prank on me, but it quickly became apparent that he was dead serious, and the person in the pictures was unmistakably my wife. I must have stared at those images for minutes, desperately searching for some explanation to shield myself from the shame and to uphold a facade of masculinity in front of my neighbor. But my emotional mask crumbled. I couldn't restrain myself. The evidence was crystal clear. My wife was indeed having an affair with a younger man. I didn't want to accept it. I tried to convince myself there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Up to that point, I hadn't picked up on any signs that my wife might have been cheating, although cheating doesn't seem to capture the depth of this betrayal. Yet, the evidence spoke loudly and clearly. I broke down and cried in my neighbor's house, right in front of him. It was incredibly embarrassing in hindsight. I was still at my neighbor's place when my wife returned home. I wasn't sure where she had gone that Saturday evening, but I recalled her telling me she was going out to see some friends, a lie I now knew to be false. My neighbor forwarded the incriminating pictures to my phone, and as I was preparing to leave his house, he insisted on accompanying me back to my house to ensure I didn't do anything I might regret. I initially objected, but he trailed me nonetheless. In hindsight, he likely wanted to ensure I didn't take any rash actions or confront her in a way that could escalate the situation, given my visible anger. I left my neighbor's house with him following closely, my sole focus being on the impending confrontation with my wife. She was in the kitchen when I entered through the garage door. I called her name and showed her the pictures on my phone, demanding to know who the man was that she was holding hands with. She appeared shocked, her gaze darting between me and the neighbor standing behind me, who inquired about what was happening. I insisted she answer the question forcefully. I'd never been offensive to my wife before, but I couldn't say that it didn't cross my mind at that moment. She couldn't deny the pictures. It was impossible, as the images clearly depicted her. I held the phone just inches from her face and repeatedly pressed her to identify the person she was holding hands with. My intensity must have been overwhelming because my neighbor attempted to restrain me. After some hesitation, she attempted to explain herself, stating that it was a 24-year-old subordinate who worked under her. She expressed remorse for everything, but I didn't want to hear it. I instructed her to pack a bag and leave my house. That all occurred a few days ago, and I haven't seen her since that day. However, my neighbor visits occasionally to check on me. I'm typically an introvert and value my privacy. Initially, I didn't appreciate his interference, but without him, I would have been completely unaware, and my unfaithful wife might have continued her affair to this day. For that, I can't express how grateful I am to him. I prefer not to have many friends, but I do have a therapist with whom I share my personal matters. Our children are still in the dark about all of this. I haven't yet been to see my therapist. These days, I only leave the house to go to work. It's been 2 weeks since I've had a proper meal or a restful night's sleep. I spend most of my day drowning my sorrows in alcohol and shedding tears. What should I do? Should I seek a divorce? Should I attempt to salvage my marriage? Should I reach out to my wife? The pain is still unbearable, worse than anything I've ever experienced, but it's somewhat comforting to know there are people here who've gone through similar situations. I understand that I shouldn't be drinking, but sometimes it seems like the only way to numb the pain. My wife texts and calls me almost every day at the same time, but I haven't mustered the courage to answer or read what she has to say. I'm uncertain if I'm ready to hear her side of the story. Currently, she's staying at her parents' house. Our children reside in another state. I haven't heard from them since before I learned about the affair, and it seems my wife hasn't contacted them either. I've reached out to my family and informed them of what transpired. My neighbor invited me for a run this morning, which helped alleviate some stress. I now consider him a friend. There's a strong sense of familiarity between us, almost as if I've known him for years. I'm also scheduled to see my therapist tomorrow. I've been jogging with my neighbor as much as possible. During our runs, he avoids discussing my wife, which is really helping me divert my thoughts. However, it's challenging not to think about it, mostly because I'm torn inside. Part of me wants to attempt reconciliation, but I'm unsure if my wife is even the same person I married anymore. It still feels incredibly surreal. I never imagined I'd need to consult an attorney or worry about STDs from my wife. I wanted to provide a little update on where I stand this morning. I shared what happened with my family the morning after I discovered it. My parents are heartbroken. I've gone through the messages my wife has sent since D-Day. They all express her love for me, apologies for her actions, and pleas for me to take her back. I'm still unsure about it all. If she truly means those words, why did she betray me like she did? My children are still unaware, but they'll be home in a few days as they finish college for the semester. I'm uncertain about how to break the news to them. Today, I have a therapy appointment, and I'm planning to schedule a doctor's visit and consult a divorce lawyer. I'm not certain if divorce is what I want, but I suppose it doesn't hurt to have it considered for the future. I returned from my therapist's appointment. Things remain confusing, but he and this community have guided me in the direction I should take now. While my therapist lacks experience with cheating trauma, he has referred me to someone who does. I'll schedule an appointment with them. He's given me some advice on the next steps, encouraging me to give up drinking, start exercising, and take my time before confronting my wayward wife in person. It's important to ensure I'm emotionally prepared to be in the same environment as she is. Now, addressing some questions I've received. My wife's affair partner is not married. He began working with her last year. He's 24, just a bit older than our daughter. My neighbor caught them holding hands at the mall one day and took some pictures. This morning, I sent her a text outlining my expectations. While I'm still unsure about the course of action I want to take, I made it clear that certain conditions must be met for reconciliation to even be considered. I mentioned that both of us should get tested for STDs. She needs to end her relationship with her affair partner and cease all contact, and she must disclose all the details of their actions together. As of now, I haven't received a response from her. Currently, I'm contemplating whether to confront my wife in person. She's been staying at her parents' house. My wife has responded to my text with all those demands, agreeing to the written timeline, granting access to her devices and social media, ending contact with her affair partner, undergoing an STD screening, and quitting her job. I still intend to consult with a few attorneys just in case. Her parents are already aware of the situation. They found out on the same day I did. She's residing at their place. What I'm uncertain about is whether to verify her written timeline with a polygraph test. I've heard that these tests are often unreliable, and I'm not even sure where to find one in my area. Yesterday marked the first time I saw my wife in person since D-Day. After returning from work, my brother and I visited her parents' house, where she's still staying. It wasn't easy being around her, but following this community's advice, I realized that certain things needed to be discussed and established in person, rather than through text and phone calls. Upon seeing me, her immediate reaction was to burst into tears and attempt to hug me. I promptly halted that and conveyed that physical contact with her is the last thing I desire right now. She appeared hurt by my response. She repeatedly expressed remorse for her mistake, professed her love for me, and insisted that her involvement with her affair partner was just an act. I confronted her about her excuses and made it clear that I didn't want to hear them. I informed her that I'll be consulting a divorce attorney next week to explore my options. I reiterated the steps she needs to take if I am to consider reconciliation with her. I had her send a no-contact message to her affair partner right in front of me and disclose all her social media passwords. She also handed her phone over to me, allowing me to take screenshots of all the texts she exchanged with her affair partner and to check for deleted messages. Being around her was incredibly difficult. Every time she spoke, I felt an urge to yell at her. Now, regarding my own healing process, I've given up drinking and started exercising. My neighbor and I go running in the morning. I've been reading as much as I can get my hands on. While food is still unappealing, I've started eating more than I did last week. She has already resigned from her job, showing me her resignation letter. I even called her workplace to verify her claim. However, she'll still need to work there for another month. Update. My wayward wife came by and handed me her written timeline of events from the day she met her affair partner. I haven't had the time to thoroughly read it. I've just skimmed through it briefly. Honestly, I need to muster the courage to read what she has written. Just reading the first few pages filled my mind with disturbing images of them together. I found a place nearby where we can arrange the polygraph test. I plan to set a date for both of us to go and confront her with the timeline. If she passes the test, I'm considering allowing her to return to the house, but not to sleep in the same room as me. I'd still like to give it a few months to assess what I want to do and observe her actions that might influence my thoughts on reconciliation. I've gone through her phone messages and social media, which was also quite challenging and made me feel physically sick. I noticed that she sent a no-contact message to her affair partner on D-Day in addition to the one I had her send yesterday, so yesterday's message was a reinforcement. I also used a few programs to check for deleted messages, but I didn't find any. However, since I'm not tech-savvy, I plan to ask her during the polygraph test if she deleted any. My wayward wife and I got tested for STDs, and the results came back negative. Right now, I feel like an emotional roller coaster, bouncing from one emotion to the next. One minute I'm a sobbing mess, the next I'm shaking with anger, and then I'm trying to go about my day as if nothing happened. If I don't have anything to occupy my mind, it gets flooded with disturbing images of them being together. An empty mind is the devil's workshop. A month ago, I would have confidently stated that my wife could never deceive me. However, in light of recent events, I've come to realize that cheaters do indeed lie. I used to unquestionably trust everything she said, but now I'm not as certain. I've been going through the timeline, and it's been emotionally challenging. I asked her to be completely open about everything. Her emotions, their flirting, the first kiss, and the details of their encounters. She didn't hold back, and I've had to take frequent breaks. I've only reached the halfway point, and there's still so much to go through. My wife has explained to her affair partner why she's quitting, and it turns out he's lost his job. Today marks 3 weeks since D-Day. I've consulted with a few divorce attorneys to understand my options in case I decide on a divorce. In my country, if infidelity is the grounds for divorce, the cheating spouse forfeits the right to alimony, so that shouldn't be a significant concern. The way a couple's assets are divided depends on their marriage contract. My wife and I have a full separation of goods agreement, meaning everything we own is either mine or hers. If we do get divorced, the division of assets is straightforward. The house is registered in my name, so she wouldn't have a claim to it. There are various paths a divorce could take, and the timeline will depend on how my wayward wife responds. It could range from a week to 2 years. In addition to divorce, I have the option to sue my wayward wife and her affair partner for emotional distress. I'm still unsure about which path to choose, but at least I'm aware of my options now. Regarding everything else happening, my daughter is returning home today. She's still unaware of her mother's affair, but I've already texted her to let her know that her mother is staying at her grandparents' house. I mentioned that something has happened and that I'd like to discuss it with her in person. The past 2 days have been the most challenging since D-Day. Both my daughter and son now know about their mother's affair. My daughter, being the first to return from college, attempted to contact her mother, but apparently she wouldn't reveal anything except that she had done something terrible. When my daughter arrived, I sat down with her and recounted everything I knew. I told her about her mother's affair with a subordinate who's young enough to be her son, and how our neighbor captured them on camera holding hands. She was just as shocked as I was on the day I found out. We embraced and cried together. She asked me what I wanted to do, and I admitted I didn't have a clear plan yet. I mentioned speaking with a divorce attorney, but emphasized that I'm still trying to figure out the next steps. My son returned home yesterday, and I think he took the news even harder than his sister did. I sat down with him and explained everything just as I did with his sister. He erupted in anger, shouting and using derogatory terms to describe his mother. That hurt more than I expected. I don't want my children to lose their mother, despite what she's done. I told him he had every right to be angry with her, but that I didn't want him to refer to her in such a disrespectful way ever again. As of today, both of them are staying home with me and helping out around the house. My wife has attempted to reach them, but they've been ignoring her calls, and she hasn't pushed the matter further. Update. I deeply want my family to be whole again. The past month has unquestionably been the worst of my life, but I've discovered incredible support here. Every morning before work, I've been going out to jog in my neighborhood. I've also started eating full meals again and seeing my new therapist. Although I miss my old therapist and the connection we had, the new therapist has been tremendously helpful in navigating my emotions. My daughter went to visit her mother. Despite her anger, she has expressed her desire to maintain contact with her. My son appears to have been the most deeply affected. He's very upset that I haven't filed for divorce yet, and has harshly criticized his mother. He's even made some hurtful comments like wishing she would pass. I've told him not to use derogatory language even though she's done a terrible thing. She's still his mom. It's challenging to accept that this new behavior is a result of the shock from the discovery and not something that was already there. I never imagined my son would become this kind of person. My son is legally an adult now and I can't force him to do anything. However, I plan to encourage him to seek individual counseling alongside me and his sister. I'll also assert myself when I believe he's being disrespectful to me or his mother. Tomorrow, I'll visit her and have her read the timeline she's written in front of me. I also have a polygraph test scheduled for next Saturday. I'm still considering my options, and I believe these next 2 steps can help me make a decision. In her timeline, she describes how he gave her attention, and she found it exciting. I haven't had a proper discussion with my wife to understand exactly what was going through her mind beyond what she's written down. But if I take her at her word, her affair partner made her feel youthful, and having a forbidden affair aroused her. Seeing her wasn't the most challenging part. I've seen her a few times since D-Day. What was tough was sitting through her reading the timeline. There were moments when I cried, and others when I was filled with anger. I had to ask her to stop a few times because it was getting too overwhelming, and I needed a few minutes to process. She cried throughout the whole process, but I'm uncertain about the sincerity of those tears. She didn't object or try to skip anything. She read through the entire thing. Whenever I asked for more details, she provided them. It took us about 4 hours to get through it. By the end, I was emotionally drained, and it seemed like she was too. I told her that we would revisit these questions during the polygraph test. Again, she didn't object. It appears that she's being genuine, but I'm uncertain about whether to believe her or not. I'm still attending therapy and going running every morning. Sometimes it's challenging to keep disturbing images and dark thoughts at bay, but I'm in a much better place now than I was in the days following D-Day. I'm still undecided about what to do going forward. My wife has started seeing a therapist, and we have the polygraph test tomorrow, so maybe I'll be able to make my decision then. I've prepared a few questions that I want to ask her tomorrow, such as, have you been completely honest with me since I found out about your affair? Is the timeline you've written a comprehensive and truthful account of events? Have you had any other affairs during our marriage? Did you delete any emails or messages on your phone and social media between you and your AP that I haven't seen? Update. I brought my wife back from her parents' house on Saturday. We didn't chat much during the drive, but her body language suggested she was uncomfortable. When we arrived and waited for the examiner, she asked if I was certain about going through with this. I confirmed. She was connected to the machine for about 20 minutes and responded with no to all my questions. Afterward, I drove her back home and left her at her parents' place once more. We didn't converse much on the way back either. I was too fatigued to revisit our earlier discussion about her timeline. She did inquire about my intentions, and I honestly admitted I hadn't decided yet. The results came in on Monday. Evidently, she was telling the truth. I thought this might help me make up my mind, but I'm still uncertain. I can't decide whether to give our marriage another shot or proceed with the divorce. I long for our old life, but she hurt me deeply. She is attending therapy. Our daughter visited her a couple of times, and she has seen her therapist too. I'm unsure if they specialize in infidelity. She did indeed respond yes to the first two questions. My son is struggling with his feelings towards his mom, and it's causing concern. He's angry with me for not divorcing his mom, which is unusual, especially considering how close they were before all this. I'm uncertain if infidelity has affected his personal relationships or if other cultural and environmental factors are at play. Every time I've tried to discuss his reaction, he's shut me out. He refuses to listen, talk about his feelings, or consider therapy to address his pain. Reader comment. To be honest, he views your inability to take action as a sign of weakness. Maybe he anticipates you should respond like a man who won't stand for his wife being used like a plaything by a younger guy. The reality is this young guy got to enjoy your wife without having to deal with the baggage of a long-term marriage. Based on what I know about affairs, he likely had his way with her. Your son wants to witness his dad taking clear-cut action. It's as simple as that. OP reply. I'd argue that having my wife leave our home and consulting a divorce attorney was a decisive move. What follows isn't up to him to decide. I will ultimately make that choice. He doesn't get to dictate what's the best path forward for my life. I'm the only one who can determine the most suitable course of action moving forward. Reader comment. But spending half an hour on a park bench with a cup of coffee, just to assess any progress, might help you clarify your thoughts. OP reply, I believe I can do that. Thanks for the suggestion. It's been nearly a month since my last update here, and my relationship is still struggling. She has done everything I've asked, but I can't shake the thought of her deceiving me and being close with another man. Part of me desires reconciliation, but another part recognizes that I'll never fully recover from her infidelity. I followed a reader's advice and began having weekly meetings with her, mostly in public places like parks and restaurants. Both my kids have returned to college and are no longer at home. My daughter is trying to mend her relationship with her mother, while my son wants nothing to do with her. I've been meeting with my wife every week to monitor her progress. She continues to attend therapy to understand the reasons behind her actions. She claims she doesn't know why she did it, but I'm skeptical. After all, she spent 9 months in an affair, which is a long time to be uncertain about your motives. A somewhat positive surprise is that her therapist recommended she read Not Just Friends by Shirley Glass. We discussed the book, and she appears to be making progress, but time will tell. She did resign from her job, and her affair partner lost his job when she disclosed the reason for her departure. I've checked her phone and email a few times. Her affair partner is still blocked, and her recent messages to him were about maintaining no contact. Whenever we've met over the past month to discuss the situation and her actions, she's claimed to be genuinely remorseful. However, I can't help but wonder if she's only remorseful because she got caught. She mentioned attending individual counseling to understand why she allowed herself to engage in the affair. She also cut ties with former friends who were apparently enabling her behavior. a story in itself. She's offered me an open channel to vent or ask questions if I feel the need. During our conversations, there were moments when I became triggered and lashed out at her. Initially, I think she was surprised by my reactions, and she tried to backtrack on the statements that triggered me. But now, when it occurs, she simply listens and lets me express my feelings. We delved into why she had the affair and her emotions during it. She mentioned justifying it as a way to find the closeness she wasn't getting at home. Now she realizes it happened because she wasn't putting effort into our relationship. In the months leading up to her affair, she began to focus heavily on her job. The limited free time she had was mostly spent with friends, leaving little time for us to be together. She acknowledges that during that period, she became self-absorbed and wrongly perceived the decrease in closeness between us as my fault. She's apologized and accepts full responsibility for her choices. She also admitted that even if there were issues in our relationship, she should have communicated with me rather than seeking satisfaction outside of our marriage. I'm not entirely sure how to interpret all of this at the moment. I guess I just wanted to share it with others for now. Reader comment. Did she explain why she was willing to remain in a marriage lacking closeness, as most spouses wouldn't accept that? Or did she discuss how she managed to feel no guilt during the affair? Has she given any insight into why the vows we made when we got married seemed unimportant to her? OP reply. According to her, it didn't happen suddenly. Rather, it built up over several frustrating months. She claims to have been aware of her affair partner's attraction to her for quite some time. He had made flirtatious comments in the past, and due to mounting frustration, she eventually started responding to them. In the beginning, she justified it as just flirting and believed it wouldn't progress further. But when it did, she felt guilty. However, she rationalized it by saying she was finding fulfillment elsewhere. And I should have noticed something was wrong when our intimacy declined without her having to spell it out. During that period, she thought I was the source of her frustration, leading to bitterness. She now acknowledges how twisted her rationalizations were, recognizing her own selfishness and reluctance to voice her concerns earlier. She has repeatedly offered her support, telling me I can talk to her whenever I need. I've sat down with her multiple times to express my feelings about discovering the affair, the 2 months we spent apart, and my thoughts about any potential future with her. On each occasion, she patiently listened and apologized at the end. I'm not entirely sure if there's much more she could do that I'd be receptive to right now. Our weekly meetings only seem to confirm that I may never fully get past it. Nonetheless, we plan to continue to see if time can heal these wounds. My main issue is struggling to trust her, and it's challenging to fall asleep knowing that my wife, who slept next to me, deceived me for 9 months. I suppose I'm holding on because I'm nostalgic for how my family used to be, and I want to ensure I've given reconciliation a fair chance. Reader comment, that she prioritized her attraction to a younger man over her marriage vows. OP reply, it's interesting. Those were almost the exact words she used when explaining her thought process that led to cheating. I may not be doing a great job of conveying our conversations. I tend to be concise when discussing upsetting topics or ones with many details. Of course, I can only recount what she told me, and there's still the possibility that she might be lying. She acknowledges that her choice to cheat was entirely her own. What she described as a lack of a love connection was a situation she caused. She was spending a lot of time at work and hanging out with friends. The decrease in closeness, which she used to justify her affair, was a result of her not spending much time at home. She now recognizes it was foolish to blame me for the reduced closeness when she wasn't putting in time with me. These are her words, not mine. Reader comment. Did she genuinely say that while she was involved in the affair and rejecting your advances, she felt bitter toward you because you didn't notice the decline in closeness? OP reply. No, she didn't say that. She mentioned feeling bitter before the affair. Reader comment. I'm curious if she has ever talked to you about her perception of your emotions when you discovered her affair, or what it was like for you when she was away. Can she convey that she understands the pain she caused you? OP reply. She did attempt to start such a conversation. She began by sharing how it pained her to witness my reaction when she read the timeline, and she acknowledged that whatever suffering she endured while we were apart couldn't compare to the pain I must have felt. I ended that discussion before it could go further because I didn't want to discuss my emotions. Reader comment. She knew she could sleep with you whenever she wanted. You were initiating. Nothing was lacking. OP reply. Once again, it seems like I'm not explaining things adequately. She understands that nothing was lacking on my part. She used this as a justification for her affair at the time, but she knows that her decision to cheat was her own failing. Reader comment. She seems to be implying that her emotions, which are subjective and not easily proven, were the cause of her affair. I call nonsense. OP reply, I'm not entirely sure I grasp this statement. If not for her emotions, what other reason would there be for her to cheat? Update. It has been 3 months since the affair, and she is still residing with her parents. I continue to run with my neighbor in the mornings and maintain a healthy diet. Mentally and physically, I feel better than I did before D-Day. I've been delving into self-improvement books and other materials to help me make a final decision about my marriage. She recently secured a new job at a company not far from the house we used to share, which suggests she may be anticipating moving back in soon. Our weekly meetings have been going well for her, but not for me. We've been meeting at various locations like parks and restaurants. She's followed all my requests, though at times I worry I'm giving her false hope. I'm genuinely attempting to rebuild trust, but it's proven more challenging than I expected. Forgiving her has been a struggle, and I thought it would improve with time. Yesterday marked our final meeting, a decision I hadn't shared with her until that moment. Prior to the meeting, I realized I couldn't continue like this. I needed to free myself from the constant reminder that she might cheat again if I let her back in. She broke my trust and confidence, and no matter how many meetings we had, I couldn't overcome that feeling. It seemed like our relationship had reached its end. We chose a secluded park for our meeting because I knew she might cry, beg, and potentially cause a scene, and I wanted to avoid drawing attention. Emotionally, I'm drained and can't continue these meetings. After breaking the news, as expected, she started crying and pleading. I explained how difficult this decision had been, and despite her efforts to regain my trust, I would alternate between feeling fine on my own and then furious at her for deceiving me for 9 months. I emphasized that, for both our sakes, we needed to go separate ways. I would maintain a friendly relationship because she's the mother of my children, but I couldn't trust her or share my bed with her again. I suggested we focus on rebuilding her relationship with my son, but I wouldn't force him. Despite her actions, her infidelity is an issue between her and me. My wife continued to cry, expressing her determination to win me back, but she respected my decision. I reached out to my lawyer today to finalize the divorce petition so I can serve it to her.